So let me start there. First, I want to let everybody know that we have to date 42 paid members. So
You want to see me?
that's pretty respectable for a new club. 42 members.
Wow.
Very good.
Cool.
And just a couple things I wanted to go over. I sent a letter out a week ago on the mentor-mentee program. And in case you didn't get the letter, one of the things we wanted to do this year, wanted to do something a little different than the traditional mentor, teacher, student thing that we always do, which that's important. You know, when you're a brand new beekeeper, it's great to have somebody you can kick things off of. So we've had this mentor-mentee program around, but this year we discussed it. We wanted to try something different. We wanted to incorporate a bee buddy program, which there are people that
Will you be my buddy?
kind of, yeah. And the bee buddy program is someone that you could actually work bees with. So somebody that lives close by, and you know, you go to their yard you go to their yard and inspect bees with them and work their bees, and then the next time they come to your yard and work bees with you. And I was kind of surprised because when we got all my responses back, I think almost everybody was more interested in having a bee buddy. So I have, I think, 6 or 7 people interested right now. If you are interested in that, Lynn had sent out the email last week, but email me or email Lynn and let us know that you're interested in it. I need your, and one thing I forgot to put on the letter was address. Make sure you put your address down, because we're going to try to pair you up with someone close by, so that if you're in the southern part of Columbia County, down where I live, you're not traveling all the way up to Canaan to do inspections. So we're going to pair you up with somebody close by. So let us know if you're interested in that. If you want to be either a mentor, a mentee, or if you're interested in the bee buddy, or in both of them. Another thing we kicked out, I wanted to announce tonight, was bee yard tours. I haven't done one in a couple of years, and I was all set to do one. And we just had a little meeting, and we decided what we're going to do is the May meeting, not next month, but the May meeting, the end of May, instead of having a traditional meeting, we're going to have the meeting at my house, and it's going to be an hour early. And we're going to have actually a big, that's going to be our meeting, is walking through the hives. So that's kind of exciting. We've never done that before. So that's going to be the May meeting. But I also want to encourage you, if you're interested in hosting a bee club a bee yard tour at your house. You know, it isn't like you've got to keep bees a long time. I think the first time I did a tour, I had only been keeping bees, 4 or 5 years. I wasn't one of these old timers that's been doing it for 20 years and had all the knowledge. I was kind of new at it. And, but I think people I appreciate going to somebody's house and seeing how they do it. Even if it's a new beekeeper, I might learn some tricks from them that everybody has their different ways of doing inspections, and you can always learn from everybody. So if you're interested in hosting a bee yard tour, again, kick me an email or kick Lynn an email and let us know, and we'll schedule that, make sure everybody knows. There's really not too much to it. I think I have mine at 9 in the morning. I'm usually done by noon, just a few hours, because for a lot of people, they've never actually even looked down into a hive before. So it's a good chance for people to really get up close and personal with bees. And the last thing I wanted to announce before I introduce our speaker for tonight, we are going to have, Columbia County is going to have their very first bee club picnic this year. And I would just say, because I've been a member over in Catskill Mountain Bee Club for quite a few years now, that's something that I look forward to every year. They have a bee club picnic, and you know, it's not like they ever have a speaker come or talk about anything. It's just you get to hang out with people, and lots of times you come to meetings and you know, you got your speaker, but you don't really get to know the people next to you. And there's an awful lot that you can learn just, you know, having a hamburger and chatting with the guy next to you. And that's when you get to really find out, well, what are your bees doing now? And in our neck of the woods, that's one thing that's pretty neat about beekeeping, is that every area is kind of different. You know, you can't just take what somebody's seeing down south and equate it to up here. And it's really, you know, what the bees are foraging on at any time of the year. And it's kind of neat when you can just hang out with other beekeepers in your area and just talk bees. So we're looking forward to that. That's Kathy's been gracious to offer to host it at her house, and we'll get more particulars to you about that. So that's all the announcements, and I'm kind of excited tonight to have York with us. You know, for me, it's been really good to be a member of Catskill Mountain for these last few years, and you know, when I first got into beekeeping, my first 2 years, I bought bees, put them in the box, and they died both years. And it wasn't until I really started reading books. I read a bunch of books. I went to YouTube school. I learned all kinds of stuff from the Fat Bee Man, York's favorite guy, and JC's Bees. And I went through all these videos and really digested a lot. But I got to say, out of all the people that I've learned stuff from about bees, I've probably learned as much from York as anybody. He knows a lot about bees, and the great thing is he's willing to share it, and I appreciate that so much. And it's like every year I seem to come across a couple. There's always a couple times in the year where I'll get a curveball, and I'll look in my hive and I'll see something that's not right. And I'll give him a call, and I know he's busy, but you know, he always returns my call. And I think he just has a desire to want people to be able to keep bees and to be able to be good at it. So I've learned a lot from him. I appreciate him, and we're just happy to have him with us tonight. So York, the floor is yours, my brother.
That may be the nicest introduction I've ever had, Wayne. Thank you very much. That means a lot to me. And I do like to talk about bees, and I do like for people to succeed at this and experience it in all its pleasures, and not just, you know, not everybody has the Florence Nightingale syndrome where they're nursing their sick bees back to health. So it's a pleasure when they're thriving. All right, well, welcome. Yeah, welcome, Yorick. Thank you all for having me tonight. We're going to talk about some spring management, kind of early spring management. And this is something, you know, the truth is it's like a 20-minute talk, and it's very basic. There's only a handful of things to really concern yourself with. But it got me thinking when I was putting this slideshow together and kind of organizing my thoughts. And it got me thinking about way back like 20 years ago now, when I started keeping bees, and I kept hearing this term, management strategy, a bee management strategy. And it always perplexed me. And I never had anyone to teach me beekeeping. Like, I learned from a stack of books, and I learned from having bees. And I've killed a lot of bees to know what I know now. I'll save you the trouble. But this always was a perplexing thing to me, this idea of a management strategy. And the truth is you have to have bees a while, and you have to keep them alive through the winter and experience the expansion and contraction through the season, and you have to experience what bees go through physically and biologically through all of the parts of the season, and then harness that. I always kind of say beekeeping is a manipulation of our understanding of bee biology, to better our experience with the bees and to better the bees' experience with us. So I thought I might roll into this talk with just an idea about what a management strategy is, especially if you're sort of new to beekeeping. This is a broader way to think about this, right? So much of this, our entire season really hinges on what we do in the spring. If our bees swarm, well, our honey crop's going to be diminished, at least early on. If we don't super them up at the right time, we're not going to get a great honey crop. There's so much that happens in just this little, I put March, April, and May here, but it's really sort of the last week of March when it all sort of kicks off, and April and May in particular. So here's some thoughts I had on this. So what is this management strategy? Is really just an understanding, and not just the understanding, but the utilization of what we understand about bee biology, but also the necessary gear that it's going to take in order to achieve these definitive goals. So not that you have to have definitive goals in beekeeping, you just have bees in the backyard and just experience the pleasure of bees for sure. But it's really, if you want something specific out of your bees, you want honey production, you want to up that game, you want to maybe make some splits and expand your operation, maybe get into queen production. I did that pretty early on. I got really fascinated with that, or just getting more combs, because that can be limiting, or you want to swap some out. There's set yourself some goals and then understand what it's going to really take to achieve these goals. And don't leave out the financial part, because I did it first. And I was blindsided by what it was going to take to move at the pace that I thought I was moving at. And what I ended up taking was every penny I had and a lot of shelving that used to be in my barn that was instant bee boxes when it all sort of exploded. So a lot of this stuff overlaps too. So let's see, we can do a hard one. So just for example, honey production. We do keep honeybees, and a lot of people would like to get some honey out of their bees. But say you're catching on, especially with this flood of what we'll colloquially call city folk coming out of New York City. The price of honey is like not a problem to get 12 to 15 bucks a pound for honey, and that was unheard of when I started. But maybe you've tapped into this market, you're finding a little way to make this hobby pay for itself. So what do? You get yourself some more bees. Of course, that's going to take some more boxes. But it's going to take more than that, right? You want to think about, you can't just get a bunch of bees and put them out. You want to understand about what the proper timing of your supering is so that you can catch that flow early on. This one caught me off guard at first. I think I supered my bees up around May 20th, because really, is there any flow in May? New beekeeper thought, well, there is, and it can be a lot. Certainly wasn't last year, but so I learned to super my bees way earlier than I thought I needed to. Have enough supers. Like if you're going to plan out a big yard, it's going to take some supers, and every colony of bees is going to need more than 2, or you're going to have to change that strategy and spin your honey out more often and things like that. So, having enough supers is definitely part of it. Controlling swarming, right? So understanding a little of the biology of swarming and how that happens, and how to, you never do prevent it, I don't think, but you can certainly try and control it. And there's a number of ways to do that. One of them is making splits. So here's some of that overlap, right? But if your bees swarm, they usually swarm on the flow. They take half of what they've already stored, and there goes half your field force. So you're going to take a hit on your honey production right there. So you're going to want to understand swarming behavior a little better. And don't forget the other side of this. This certainly is an early spring management, but you can have, pull 50 supers and try to do all that with a fork and a 4-frame hand extractor. We held onto our hand crank extractor far longer than we really should have. And we just sort of offset that by having friends over for a couple bottles of mead in the garage in the evening, and we take turns. But eventually we upgraded to electric extractors, and now we run a couple of them. And then, you know, the bottleneck became and it doesn't matter what I mean, you're going to upgrade. Not everybody's going to have a licensed automatic extraction line like we do now, but that sort of became our bottleneck. But your bottleneck might just be, you know, you can't do 20 supers on the couple of evenings you have with a hand fork and a 4-frame or 2-frame extractor. So you got to think these things out and be ready for them rather than suddenly be blindsided by it. You know, nuke production, this is something else I had gotten into, just sort of thinking this is great. And I'm sort of a myopic in the moment kind of person, but I knew I needed nuke boxes, especially the way we did it before. We learned the 4/4 partition system. We did it conventionally. You make five-frame nukes up in the spring. No problem. I found these Amish guys up in Fort Plain that made these boxes assembled for like $6, you know, like I think I bought like 30 or 40 of them. Made some nukes up and, you know, bought some queens and we started making nukes. And then it occurred to me like, well, every one of these things is going to grow up and it's going to need a lot more than a nuke box. And okay, there goes my savings. But man, what a pleasure making nukes is. But you know, it's more than making nukes is more than making nukes, you know, unless you're going to sell them, which I wasn't. I was just growing like, oh yeah, I'm going to need a lot more equipment. And they need feeding. They don't just feed themselves, and not if they're going to grow properly, and certainly not if they're going to make comb for you, which they were exceptional at. So we learned how to use protein patties to our advantage, and we learned that bees love protein patties. And when they eat protein patties, especially when you push them with protein, they plump up, they always act healthier, their morale goes up. They love that when you feed them protein like that, and they will make lots more brood. And then I got tired of, you know, spinning out with a drill and a paint mixer in a 5-gallon pail over and over again. Suddenly, if you're going to start making lots of nukes, you need to make more syrup at a time. So we upgraded to a 50-gallon drum and a Minn-Kota boat motor, and that's how we make syrup now. So not that everybody's going to grow to this point, but it doesn't matter at what level you're doing it. You got to keep in mind all of the pieces of the puzzle, right? So that's the management strategy and the timing of all of it. And just so much of this also comes with what our friend Greg Stoddard, I love this term, I'll always use it, hive hours. It's not how long you've been keeping bees. You can have bees in the backyard for 25 years. If you look at them twice a year, you know, that's not the same as looking at them twice a week. It's all about the amount of hours. The more bees you look at, the more understanding you have of the systems. You know, for nukes, it takes equipment. And much like the supers, you know, you just got to be ready for these things to grow. So, and it's not just boxes, it's the frames and it's the foundation. Oh, and they all need a feeder. So this just brings me back to when I started. Like all of this was just like, I guess I could have thought that out a little further and not been surprised by a lot of this. So, but this is what I mean when we talk about, you know, management and actually what it takes to do things with your bees, making comb, right? Comb is everything to beekeepers, especially if you're going to expand and get bigger, right? Combs. I'm always limited, especially in nuke production. We found that one out early. Like, okay, you can have all the plans and all the boxes you want. You are going to be limited by the number of combs that you have if you're going to, you know, make nukes, especially later into the season, right? Don't forget they all need a queen. And you can make them, you know, as you find swarm cells, that works pretty great. But if you're going to plan out 25 or 30 nukes, have them on time, you're going to need queens to introduce to those, or let them make their own. But that's a whole different management system and a different understanding of how the nuke is going to grow. So have them reserved and timed. And again, I remember just like, I'm just going to call and order some queens. Yeah, if you don't do that well in advance, you're probably not going to get them right at nuke making time. So I started looking for swarm cells to make them with, and then we just learned to make our own queens. Right, roll your own. Probably one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done with bees. I love making big honey crops is awesome and everything, but there's nothing like dividing your bees and making more bees and then making queens and selecting the queens you breed from and everything that goes with it. So, if you're going to buy your own queens, you got to take the financial part of that into consideration. At the time, I think they were like sent to your door for $23 20 years ago. And any kind you want. I had no idea that honeybees were anything but that golden Italian bee. I didn't know there were different races, and that's a whole rabbit hole of its own. But that got expensive buying queens like that. So I thought, much like I thought I'd get into beekeeping, because it's a cheaper way to get honey. Well, I'll make my own queens because, it certainly is cheaper, but it comes with its own host of management strategies that we won't go into tonight. But making queens is really, really rewarding to do. And most folks use swarm cells. We still do it. If I'm making nukes, I've made a lot of queens in my life, and I never make them as good as the bees make them. So, if you happen to miss that swarm and she's left you 15 beautiful cells, look at the size of these things. They're as big as your thumb. Use them, but you can't count on them, and you can't time things out so that you're on a kind of a schedule with them. So you got to keep things like that in mind. So, and it takes bees. That's something I learned. When we talk about managing and the strategy of it, it takes a lot of bees to make more bees, especially queens, and comb production. We learn, again, the comb is precious, and you will always be limited if you want to grow by the amount of combs you have. And back in the day, okay, I know what the book says. You put, you rotate combs into your production colonies, but we always got like these combs that had, lots of drones in them. You've put a foundation in a full-size colony, in May, you're going to get a fair amount of drone comb in there. But if you want beautiful, like, look at this picture, white, beautiful, straight comb, not a drone cell on it. Well, nukes do that, right? Nukes don't know what a drone is for. So we learned very quickly, like, you don't get comb drawn in your production colonies. You get them drawn in your nucleus colonies, because they always do it perfect. Like, you hear things along the way, like, plastic is just horrible and the bees don't really make good comb on it. Usually people that say things like that are trying to get comb drawn in August or something like that, and they don't really have a good understanding of what it takes to get good comb drawn on plastic or wax. And what it takes is lots of young bees, right? Bees only make comb for just a few days of their life, and it's when they're very young and when there's lots of them. And when is that? Well, that's in May and June, basically. So we learned early on, like, if you want comb drawn, you better harness that in the early part of the season. And you have to know that. So the more combs you have, the better, but you're certainly not going to get good comb drawn, much past early July for sure. And I just love this picture when queens lay right on the plastic and they basically draw the comb up around the egg and larva as it's hatching, like it's full on when they're doing it like that. But again, it's this understanding of bee biology and when they make good comb, and how to feed them to get them to stimulate them to make good comb. So you need lots of bees. So, it's population and flow dynamics that you have to understand. So you incorporate this into a strategy, right? So you're getting what you expect, like when you ought to be expecting it. So just something else we learned along the way, and it's a really cool picture, is that if you have mice damage or whatever damage, wax moth, whatever, you got wrecked combs, you kicked a hole in them. I've done that enough times. If you put this thing in a production colony in May, they're just going to put swarm cells there, or they're going to put drone comb there. But if you put it in a nucleus colony, they will fix it and you will barely see a seam. And the only way you'll know anything happened is because the color of the wax is different. And again, this thing's full of eggs. Check that out. Bees are just remarkable, but I had no idea until we did it the first time because I was out of comb and didn't have a good management strategy. So, okay, I got this old ratty comb. I was kind of waiting till the end and stuck it in some nukes. Like, holy cow, they fix it perfect. Don't know what a drone is for. And just to underscore the point of timing, this is kind of what you get when they're in August, or you've missed your window of opportunity when you've got prolific population of young bees and a good flow to draw comb on. Hey, I didn't touch that. So anyway, when I talk about management strategies, sort of these are the things, the understanding of the timing and the equipment and everything it takes, and you put it all together, and it's pretty complex. But once you do it a few times, like, you sort of get it nailed down. So that's kind of how we come about this strategy, this management we talk about. So practical applications. We'll start right here. This was not that long ago. This was only, I think, a month ago I took this picture. This is a yard. This is up at our farm in East Durham. And this is a nuke yard. These are all double partition nukes overwintering. So we start here, coming out of winter when we talk about spring management. And of course, the first thing we want to know is, well, are they alive? And we'll just get this out of the way because sometimes they're not alive. Are they dead? This is really a different talk, because we could talk for half an evening about why bees die, what to look for, and that sort of thing. And I've done that talk plenty of times. But I would just say, if your bees died and you're not quite sure, or you want to put the pieces and the pathology of that together, Megan Milbrath has come up with this absolutely wonderful website in Be Informed. Why did my honeybees die? And it just picks apart everything step by step. It puts all the pieces of the puzzle together. So I recommend, if you want to really, and if your bees die, it's tragic and it sucks. Even, at my level, as long as I've been keeping bees, I still hate to lose bees. But I always try to learn, and tighten up my game and do the work to figure out why they died, or where the holes in my management are, why they died. So you can learn a lot from dead bees and apply it to your beekeeping so that you kind of limit that and you try and minimize that. So this is a fantastic website. Grab a screenshot of it and visit it. It's definitely valuable information. All right. We're just going to assume everybody's bees are alive. They're alive. Now what? Okay, so again, these are pictures I took not very long ago. These are all this season's pictures. What do you do? First thing we do when we go out and look at our bees for that first time, and usually that's sometime around mid-May, mid-March. I think we got all our bees kind of looked at by March 15th this year. And I saw we had a really good winter, I'll have to say. I feel for everybody that lost their bees, and a lot of folks are having some trouble, I understand, but we're having a pretty good season. And our bees look like this, which is wonderful. I mean, everybody wants a hive that's that strong. But if you're new to beekeeping, you might not know that it's kind of common to think like bees starve over the winter. They run out of their honey while keeping warm. But the truth is, bees don't really use that much honey to keep warm. It doesn't take that many calories to, even a hive this big, to keep them warm. They really starve to death in March and April, and it catches people off guard. So this is sort of the first thing we're concerned with, is starvation, especially when you got big booming colonies coming out of winter. Big healthy bees like this, we'll look at a colony like this and determine how much honey's around them, right? So this colony, there was a fair amount of honey around it, but they would never make it to first bloom. So definitely need feeding. And it was still pretty cold, and we reserve lots of deep frames of honey. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm about to set that box of honey right on top of these things, and then we don't have to worry about them. I don't have to bring syrup up there and deal with these out yards. We run a couple hundred colonies, so everything we do is sort of you know, if I'm going to go feed bees, it's a process to go feed bees. So I don't like to go visit them too often to fill feeders. So if we can just drop honey on them, that's great. But the first order of business is, are they going to starve? So if they need feeding, feed them, whether you've got honey or you got to put some syrup. Do they even need feeding, right? So here's another colony in that same yard. And we look at this one, it's a little smaller, and look at all the capped honey, you know, look right down in the frames. And you learn this over time, like, is this enough honey to get a colony this big through the winter? And it's just something you learn by observing, by keeping notes for sure, paying attention. And this is probably right on the edge of what I would say, you know, in an ideal world, I found that if you want your bees running out of honey or right down to that last frame of honey just about the time the flow starts. So you've got lots of room for them to build brood. And once the nectar starts, they don't really want to eat their honey anyway. So we should want to make these determinations, you know, this one's probably going to need some food, and I might not put, you know, 8 frames of honey on this one. I might just put 5 above it and fill the rest out with comb. But this one's in good shape. You know, I'm not worried about this starving right away. Still lots of honey around it. So here's a nice little cluster of bees. This one isn't, you know, I see this and I go, okay, these bees look pretty good coming out of winter. I see some honey around them, but those outside frames are empty. And even though it's not a huge colony of bees like that first picture, there's not a lot of honey around these. So again, they're not in danger of starvation this week and probably not next week, but by the end of April, they may be living hand to mouth. So bottom line is, you know, make a good assessment and don't be afraid to look at them when it's cold. I think that's a kind of a new beekeeper. Like everybody thinks, if you open the top and look at them when it's cold out, you're going to let all the heat out. You're going to freeze them to death. And that is not the case. In fact, I like to look at my bees when it's like 30. We'll check bees because they'll still be in a kind of a nice cluster and you can get a good assessment. They're not all scattered. At 45 degrees, they're not going to look this tight. They'll be all over the place. So to get a good assessment of kind of how many bees we have and how much food is around them, I like it to be a little bit colder. And you don't want to dally. You don't want to stick around too long, but there is nothing wrong with opening your bees when it's cold. Not that you want to manipulate them or do anything but observe and maybe throw another box on them. But here's a good example of bees that that's a fine colony of bees if they don't starve to death. But sometimes it's too cold to feed syrup, or maybe you don't have honey put away. If it's below 50 degrees, bees actually don't metabolize sugar syrup below 50 degrees. So we're kind of stuck putting winter patties or semi-solid food or dry sugar on our bees. And this is sort of an emergency thing. Generally, when I've found we've had to do this, it's lack of attention on my part, like back in September. In an ideal world, you would never feed your bees fondant or sugar or candy of any kind. If you just feed them properly and lots of it in the fall time, you really don't have to do this and deal with the shims and everything that comes with it. But there are times when you get caught off guard, everything doesn't always go to plan, and you got to feed your bees some fondant. If they need it, they need it. We used to feed just dry sugar on a sheet of paper, and it works well. I saved a lot of bees like that over the years, especially after Hurricane Irene, which is when I learned how to do it. It just wiped out the fall flow, and it was hard to even get to some of the yards. Everybody remembers that fiasco. My buddy said, well, just throw a sheet of newspaper on them and dump 15 pounds of dry sugar and check them when you can. Saved a lot of bees like that year. But you can see here, the bees love them. These sugar patties, they look like pollen patties, they're kind of dark, but the truth is they're mostly sugar, and they have just enough protein to kind of round out the nutritional profile. And the bees love them. I mean, obviously they mow them down. And I think lots of times they'll just bypass their honey and just eat the patties, which I think is also fine, because if they want to live on the patties for a while and then build brood on their honey reserves, I think that's a pretty good strategy too. Yeah, sometimes especially like we've got bees kind of far away in places. We don't, I can put a few patties on, but probably not going to get back there. If they really need feeding, I'll throw 2 shims on and, a stack 7-8 pounds of those things on if we can. Never was a fan of like putting a patty on, putting another one on, because you always end up kind of smashing bees between them. Or so if you're going to feed them up, might as well just give it right to them. But this is what we're concerned with in early spring. First and foremost, we got to feed them. And if it's too cold to get syrup on them, which is ideal, but if it's hovering around 40 degrees, might maybe give them some solid food. This is just a neat picture. I opened this one up. This was kind of far away, so I gave it a double shim and dumped like 15 pounds of sugar on it. And I came and I looked at it and I said, they haven't touched any of that sugar. It was just a big mound. And then when I pulled the shim away and broke a piece out, I realized they had hollowed it all out, and they were in fact eating it, and they were rearing brood down in there like a sugar igloo. Kind of a cool picture. But we probably left the shim on too long, because that happens. You got to be careful about that. Coming out of spring, if you got to feed them food, you're going to have to put a spacer shim around them. Been guilty of leaving it on a little too long more than once. Generally, you'll find that it's just full of drone brood. I can't think of too many times I've seen them like this when they've had a lot of worker brood in there. So in some ways, it's a shame they put a lot of resources into this. But on the flip side, you probably got 90% of your drones, of your mites in those drones, if it's all capped like that. So you can just shake the bees out and take those drones away, and knowing that you at least got a nice mite trap with that. But you definitely don't want to leave your shim on too long. Like once we're starting to see a bloom, you've probably left it on. So check them and make sure they're not filling in the gap. This is what we call a violation of the bee space. But if it's above 50, try and get syrup on them. Syrup is always, I think, superior to feeding solid food, because the bees can take it down, they can metabolize it quicker, they can put it right where they want it, store it right up close. So that if it does get cold again, they don't have to go too far to get their food. And you'll find that particularly if you've got some dry sugar or something like that on your bees and you start feeding them liquid food at the same time, suddenly all that solid food becomes hive trash, and they'll just start chucking it out like this one did. And I wish I had a video, because I distinctly remember seeing this bee like a bulldozer, and she was just like, and moving all of my sugar out onto the concrete underneath, and pulling the paper, all these still strips of paper, that's all from the winter patties. And you'll see them. It's one of those funny things in the springtime when you see bees, coming out strong and they've eaten their patty and they just start dragging out the trash. But this is pretty much your indication that they're ready for liquid food, or they've already had some, the flow's turning on. They'll start throwing out your solid food. And the books say, you feed them 1-to-1 in the springtime and it's stimulative. But the truth is, if we're still talking about emergency feeding your bees, like if they're living hand to mouth or they're right at the end of their honey, and we've still got a ways to go, or it's still going to be, right on the edge, 1-to-1 may not be the best. You might want something more akin to a 1.5-to-1 or even 2-to-1, because, what is the goal? It's not just to stimulate them with 1-to-1 that they've got to process. It's about feeding them something more calorically dense if you want them to be storing some of that. So you can keep that in mind, that it's not always just 1-to-1. It's really, what your bees need. And then usually, once we realize, okay, they're not going to starve and they're starting to grow a little bit. The next thing I'm sort of concerned with is that they make the turnover, what we call the spring turnover, where the last of your winter bees, your Dinatitis bees, are sort of giving up the last of their body reserves to make that first generation of bees that's then going to kick off the whole season and turn it over, right? So the next big concern is there enough protein in the hive to do that? And maybe you've got enough bees to just give up their body reserves to make that turnover. But it sure is a lot easier for bees to build brood if they've got a little extra protein, whether they've stored pollen around themselves. And you don't really get a chance to look in March to see how much pollen stored there. So maybe just give them a little bit of protein patty. I used to, when we were into making nukes and we were expanding and splitting bees, and it was all about growing up bees so fast just so you could split them and keep splitting them. And I wasn't worried about swarming because I was splitting bees. I wasn't worried about honey production. So we would pound the protein to them and really push them with it. And they expand really quick. When you start feeding protein, pollen patties to your bees, it's one thing to give them a little piece of protein to kind of help them make that turnover. But if you start pushing your bees with protein, like you start feeding a lot of protein to your bees, you put them out of sync with nature. So realize you're starting to play God, which isn't always bad. It's fun to play God a little bit, but you got to keep playing God. So if you start building up your bees and you get these nice big populations and suddenly you're not feeding them protein anymore, or it gets cold or something like that, that can be problematic. If you suddenly get a cold snap and they sort of, cluster up tighter, you might have some chilling of brood around the edges and things like that. But the other thing is when you start pushing your bees with protein is you start moving everything forward in the season, right? That's what I mean by playing God. You're putting everything out of sync, which is fine if you have a strategy for that, a management strategy to do that. But just know you're also moving swarming season up. You're building up really big populations of bees, which is great. They can take advantage of a honey flow, but you're also making a swarm factory. So if you're pushing your bees early with protein, your bees are going to start pushing you a little bit at the beginning of the flow, so you got to keep those dynamics in mind. But don't be afraid to give your bees some protein. And you'll see the difference when bees really start mowing down the protein patties. They bulk up, they incorporate that protein or a good portion of it into the equivalent of bees' body fat. It's called vitellogenin. And your bees look fat. Maybe it was me, but we used to call them chubbies. Like they would bulk up. They seemed to be shinier. They smelled better. They acted better. They were healthier. I don't think it was all perception. Feeding bee protein to bees was always a pleasure. We don't do it so much anymore because I don't really want to be pushed back by my bees. But just know if you're going to feed your bees protein, probably don't want to be much more than 6 weeks ahead of your flow, because what you'll end up doing is you'll build a nice population ready to take advantage of that first, nectar flow. But if you build them up too soon and you got a big population of bees and that flow doesn't happen for another 2 weeks, you can have welfare bees. Then you're going to be having to feed syrup too. They burn through their honey reserves. So you can sort of get welfare bees, they're sometimes called, where you've got to sort of nurse them through with the carbohydrate too. So it's a tricky thing to build your bees up in anticipation of the flow. And now we're back to understanding timing of the flows. So protein patties, give them a try. Bees love eating these things. They build brood, and who doesn't love seeing brood frames like that? That's what you get when you feed your bees pollen patties. Nice brood. So we come out of winter and our bees survived and we've got plenty of honey. Maybe we've given them a little bit of food to get through. And we're not worried about them starving anymore, and we're paying attention and it's warming up. And here we are, the first week of April, maybe April 10th. We start thinking about reversing hive bodies. Like that's the next thing. Usually around year 2 or 3, beekeepers start hearing about this and they want to reverse their hive bodies. And there are the folks that want to do it too soon. And there are folks that miss the opportunity because you sort of have to hit this one right on the head. So you have to do it when all of your brood is in the top box, and they will be like that at some point. And again, this kind of comes back down to how big the colony is, right? So that first picture I showed you, that massive colony, you could probably reverse that hive sooner than the smaller one. And some considerations on that are just that it doesn't get too cold. Like if we're going right into a winter snap in late April, you probably are best to just not reverse your bees. But you will find your bees at some point in the springtime where all of the brood and bees are in the top box and the entire bottom box will be empty. They'll have eaten or moved all the honey out of it. There will be nothing but 10 empty combs or 8 empty combs. And at that point, you can do a reversal. It's literally taking that empty bottom brood, half of the brood chamber, and putting it on top. And this comes down to sort of what we know about queens. Queens really are, at least to me, they're always happiest when they are working up. You know, if they have to sort of turn around and go back down, it's like, oh, they're already starting to think about swarming if she has to go back down to the bottom box. But if she can just continue to lay upwards, and as a swarming control, I've always found that a good control on swarming is having empty comb adjacent and above the brood nest. And whether that's a reversal and now you've got empty comb up here for her to keep laying in, or also with honey supers, if you put combs of supers and there's always empty comb adjacent to your brood nest, like above your queen excluder for us, bees, I guess they never, not to over anthropomorphize the whole thing, but they just think like we're not there. We're not quite there. It keeps them from backfilling nectar down in the brood nest. And as long as your bees can stay in expansion mode and not feel the pressure of packing in too much nectar down in the brood nest and backfilling, keeping that empty space adjacent to where the brood is a really nice control on swarming. So sometime, and it usually happens around the first week of April, second week of April if they're a little smaller. By that time, we have been able to get into our bees at least once or twice. So you can sort of make that judgment. And you absolutely don't need to do this. I would probably say most people don't do it, but it's a really nice kind of that next level when you've had bees for a while and you want to make a manipulation, or you want to, you know, try upping your game. Try reversing your hive bodies. And if it's like the second week of April and you reverse them, that's also a great time to throw a honey super on. I don't think it's, and again, we watched the 10-day forecast, 15-day forecast. It seems to be nearly worth nothing as far as the weather goes, but temperature trends, you can always sort of count on the 15-day forecast. And that's really all it's about for me this time of year. So when the 10, 15-day forecast temperatures are favorable and they're going to be at least, you know, 50s, and we're coming into that. I'm looking at the 15-day forecast today going, tomorrow's going to be a crappy day. But I'm seeing like upper 50s and 60 daytime, 40-degree, mid-40 nighttime. There's nothing wrong with reversing. There's no danger of reversing and supering your bees at that time. So this is the first reversal. So you get to do this twice if you care to. And again, I'll just stress, like, this is not necessary. If you are uncomfortable with it or you're not certain, don't do it. You don't have to. But that's reversing hive bodies, and that's sort of where we're coming into in the season, just to sort of put this where we are here in our own season this year. Then you get a second reversal, right? So you reverse your hive bodies. The queen continues to lay into that empty top box. And then she'll lay that up for about, 2 weeks to 21 days is what it takes for a worker to emerge. So about that time, between the second and third week, if you reverse them again, and now it doesn't matter, you definitely don't want to reverse your bees unless they're all in the top box, because if you've got brood in both boxes, then you're going to sort of split the brood. You'll have chilled brood, you'll have confused bees, you'll have demoralized bees to some degree. So that's one thing before, I think I missed saying it, but if you've got brood in both boxes, you can't reverse. So just move on. But if you do, reverse them, and then up to 21 days later, you can do it again, because what's going to happen with all those bees that she laid in that bottom box, you can put it on top. They'll be hatching out over the course of the next week or two, effectively giving you another empty box or another place for her to continue to lay upward and expand her brood nest. So keeping your bee, your queen in expansion mode is really a nice way to sort of keep a handle on swarming. Not that that's all there is to it for sure, but it's one more thing you can do. Usually by the time you get a second reversal on, done, the honey flow is started, and you don't really, the dynamics of the hive change. So we usually try and get 2 reversals. I don't often get a second one just because of the nature of how many bees we have, but it sure feels good when I find them and it's like, okay, we can reverse everybody at least once, because I know that gives me a little bit of breathing room when it comes to swarming season. And about this time, we're kind of pulling off our wraps and pulling off the homosote and foam. This is something we use a lot. And there are various ways to achieve this goal of moisture absorption and insulation of the hive. It's not insulation of the entire hive. Just to give you an idea of the concept, it's what they used to call a quilt box, right? It was just an empty box. It was full of chips, or it was full of quilts, I guess, originally, when they'd outlived every other purpose in life, because those folks were frugal. They'd throw them all in an empty box and put it on top of the colony. And what did it do? It absorbed the moisture, and it kept the top of the hive warmer than the walls of the hive, right? So that's the whole concept of the quilt box. We achieve the same thing with a sheet of homosote, which is compressed paperboard, and rigid foam insulation on top of that. These 2 things between the inner cover and outer cover. And we always get, somebody, oh, well, doesn't it just absorb more moisture from outside the hive? Definitely not. And this picture kind of tells the story. And this is something we find our bees this time of year, because they're expanding their brood nest. Now they're really burning calories. And when they burn calories, they're giving off metabolic moisture. And it's when they start rearing brood that the homosote really becomes most important to me. This is when they start really giving off moisture. And if you didn't insulate the top, and we had those cold nights, you would have all that warm, moist air condensing on that cold lid and raining or precipitating back down on your bees, making it really hard for them to stay warm. So that's what this whole quilt box or the homosote and foam is about. It's not about keeping heat in the hive. It's about controlling where the inevitable water vapor that's within the hive, that you can't ventilate it all out. So you just control where it condenses, and you want it on the walls so that when it warms up, it runs down away from your hive. And if you've never looked in your hive in the wintertime, you might be shocked at how thick the frost can be all along the outside, particularly the handholds, because the wood is the thinnest there. It really, if you're doing it right, you will see just a nice frosty layer on the inside. And it's also why we tip our hives forward, so that when it does melt, it just runs out of the colony. So that's generally what we're doing in early April, depending on how the temperatures are going. We're pulling mouse guards. Again, you can see here, we'd fed these bees some winter patties, and they're pulling the paper out. And this is what we use for mouse guards. We're changing. We're actually using a little mouse guard that attaches to our reducers now. So I just have to flip it up or down instead of cutting mouse guards like this every year. Because it always seemed like these were great. They're cheap, the wire mouse guards, but they, you never quite get them pulled off, or at least I never did, without them getting all wrinkled up. And I always ended up cutting new ones every year. But it's really nice to have these ones that just flip up now. So pulling mouse guards, and mice generally aren't really a problem for your bees. Once we're getting, once your bees are starting to get active and we got 50-degree flying days, the mice know better than to try and get in them then. And then reducers, we always kind of wait until we start getting, getting backed up a little bit. And then we'll pull our reducers. Obviously, this picture on the left here, we've waited just a little too long. Your bees start getting backed up like this, it's definitely time to remove your reducer. So that's happening in April. We're adding supers, something I learned early on. Add supers early. I like to have all our supers in place by the last week of April if we can do it. And it's a big lift for us. That's hundreds and hundreds of supers. But the sooner you get them on, especially if suddenly we get a nice early nectar flow, it happens. We have actually collected dandelion honey in the past, which is not all that common. But if we're having a good early start to the season, you want your bees to be able to take advantage of that. So super them up. And it's not like you just put the comb on your bees and they go filling it. Your bees got to fuss with it. They want to shear it down. They want to clean it up. So if you're putting your supers on the flow, you're going to sort of miss some of the flow, because they don't just start storing it in there. They want to get that comb set the way they want it. And yeah, if you time it right, you get monster colonies like number 15 here. If you super up, we have a good flow. It happens. This particular year, we had a locust flow. This is up by our farm. And I came down into the valley, and I'll never forget, I had never seen it like this. We always say we get a locust flow around. It always happens around the 20th to the end of May in that period, that 10-day period. And it's a rare year when they actually bloom and the weather is such that the bees can take advantage of it. It'll be raining, it'll be windy, and it'll knock all the buds off. But every 5-6 years, it seems like we'll get just the right conditions where the locusts bloom and the weather is perfect. And man, you can't have enough bees, at least up in East Durham where we are. You can't have enough supers on your bees when the locust flows on. And I remember coming down the valley this year when we collected 325 pounds off this colony, one colony. It looked like it had been snowing for 2 weeks. It was just white. Everything was white. And it really was like, there's a lot of locust trees here. You wouldn't even know it, except they're all blooming. And we were fortunate. We kept this hive under control with it swarming, and we had it supered up. And I don't do it anymore because I found when they would swarm, my virgin queens are flying back in above my queen excluder. So I don't tip my lids up anymore. But we used to do this. And this colony gave us 325 pounds, and it would have given us more, except I didn't give them enough room to do it. So this is comb they stored in the little area between where I had the lid tipped up. So they just maxed out this hive. And I think it had 7 supers on it, and all beautiful light locust honey. So you never know what nature's going to give you. So be ready for it and super your bees early. Something I learned the hard way. So how many supers, when, right? April 15th through May 7th is, if you're much later than that, you're probably missing at least a little bit of the flow. Definitely if you've got comb, it's a whole different ball game than when you've got foundation. And I remember drawing out foundation, but comb is precious. And when you just put supers of comb on, they just fill it. They don't have to build it. They shear it down, they clean it up, and they fill it. So if you're putting on supers, put on 2 if you've got comb, or if you got comb and foundation, checkerboard them. Usually if we're looking to get some foundation drawn, we'll run foundation between combs, good straight combs, because it's a nice template for them to draw off. And they'll draw the drawn combs out like big fat slices of cake, and the foundations will be drawn much shallower, and they won't go through the automatic uncapper, but it's the thick ones do. So that's kind of nice. But they that's how we get if you're going to get foundations drawn, checkerboard them in with your combs. But certainly if you've got lots of comb, put 2 supers on at a time. There's not much point in putting on one. And if you think about how much nectar, how much moisture is in nectar that they have to reduce, if you're looking to get 1 super of honey, it probably takes 2 or 3 supers worth of volume for them to process that honey and fan it and move it around, and without having to, and again, you don't want them backfilling it in the brood nest. You'd like them not to have a drop of honey in their brood nest in an ideal world. So throw on lots of comb. If you're going to put on, if you just got foundations and you're just building, just give them one super foundation at a time. Just so it always seems like it was a little demoralizing to bees when we asked them to build too much foundation at once. Always seem to not work as hard as if you just gave them a little at a time and coaxed them along. And then 9 frames versus 9 comb. We run 9 combs in our supers, and you have to run 10 foundations, or they'll pull brace comb and cross comb in there. But definitely it's a counterintuitive, but if you run 9 combs in your 10 frame honey super, you will actually get more yield of honey in that super. They just draw them out really nice and fat, and they are a pleasure to uncap, especially if you're using a knife or something like that. You don't have to worry about picking the low spots and using the fork. So we like our supers drawn out nice and big. And now we've got the automated uncapping machine. Like, they have to be beyond the bars. So just load those things in and the jiggle knives do it. So that's how many, that's when, like I said, don't wait too much past the first week of May to try and get your honey supers on early. And then usually right around, the time you're putting your first honey super on, honey supers on, is probably a good time for a formic acid treatment as well. And again, for us, if we're going to do it, we try and incorporate as many things just for efficiency. So super up, treat bees, definitely test. Counting is something we don't just prophylactically add treatments anymore. We're monitoring mites much more carefully than we ever have. And that may have something to do with the success. Our overwintering success has been going up steadily. But it's a great time, especially if you use formic. The bees hate that stuff, and you'll drive them out the front of the hive sometimes. But if you can put an empty honey super on at the same time, it'll give your bees a chance to get out and away from that vapor. And we're finding that I think people that are having more success with their bees are treating earlier and understanding that controlling mites earlier in the season and not just waiting until the summer when it's time to knock them down before your winter bees are made. Like, that was a good concept, but you still got a virus load that's building in there with your mites. So to keep that mite population just continually knocking it down and keeping it below 1%, I think the folks that are doing that and keeping that early treatment on their bees are having the most success with it. Our friends down in New Jersey, they're in a different zone. I think they're doing 6 down there. But those guys, the first time they look at their bees in March, they're putting Apivar strips in, and it works for them. I mean, that stuff works fantastic. They'll put it in for 30 or 40 days. They can take it out for the required 10 days before they're right on time with their supers. That's a little trickier for us. I think you would have to put an Apivar strip in right about the first time you were looking at your bees, if you wanted to take that approach. But this idea of treating your bees earlier and more often and definitely monitoring, I think is a huge part of being a successful beekeeper in today's environment and climate. Oops, going the wrong way. So we're monitoring, and this is also the time when if we're treating with formic pads, I don't make it a point to go back and take them off. It's mechanical. There's not going to be resistance issues with it. So I see no reason to disturb the colony again. So quite often those treatments from last fall will be here the first time we crack our boxes or we do a reversal. And it always makes me so happy to see this. Mite pads played out and covered in dead mites. And you'll see that right in the seams, just full of dead mites. So can't stress it enough. Monitor for your mites. Keep your levels below 2%, preferably below 1%. Damn, keep going the wrong way. And then just some other things that we're doing in the springtime. It's always a flurry of activity, getting supers ready. This year we're doing something different because we now have Surtan on the market. And I don't know if any of you have had problems with wax moth in the past. For us, we've got hundreds and hundreds of supers and we keep them in dedicated buildings. But man, those buildings stink because we always have paramoth on them. And it smells like mothballs. It's not mothballs, but it's moth crystals. So it smells like my grandma's attic. But that stuff, it's always sort of questionable whether, to the state of California, it's known to cause cancer. But this year we have Surtan, or last year it got approved. So I would encourage you, if you have a bunch of comb to store and you're kind of tired of using paramoth or you're running out of room in your freezer, Surtan is just a bacteria. It's Bacillus thuringiensis awazawi, BT401, BT402. They're very specific. Bacillus thuringiensis is very specific to a particular type of caterpillar. So there are some that control tent caterpillars. There are some control various types of caterpillars like in the garden, but BT awazawi 401 is the number, and it controls wax moth larvae. And basically you just mix this stuff up. It's totally natural. Mix it in water and spray it on your combs, and it's impervious to wax moths. When wax moth larvae eat even one bite of that particular bacteria, it causes a crystalline protein to form and basically explodes the digestive system within a few bites of those wax moth larvae. So I've never had it in my entire beekeeping career where I didn't have to really protect my combs hard in some way when I was done with them to protect them from wax moth. And I'm really excited this year. The idea that it's not going to stink and I can put them away and not worry about them, because I always worry about them. So I want to bring that one to your attention in case you didn't know. Sertan BT401 is going to be a game changer. But now's the time of year you have to do it. You know, we couldn't do it in the fall because there's too many bees out. You got to wait till all your bees are dormant, or they would just be like, it would be like an Alfred Hitchcock movie in our garage. So that's what we're doing now. We're scraping everything and cleaning stuff, and we are sertanning everything. But I'm also making hive stands. I'm going to expand 2 full yards this year. Looking forward to making some more nukes. So one of these yards I expect will be a nuke yard, and probably big enough to do another 40 nukes. And one of these yards will be a honey production yard, and will probably be 20 production colonies going in down along the Catskill Creek in a place that's really proven to be exceptionally good, particularly in the fall when the knotweed blooms along the creek. It's just one of my favorite honeys. So this is stuff we're doing repairs, building frames, and getting ready for the season, assembling some more gear if we're ready for our expansion, right? Back thinking about that management strategy. So even though we're talking about early spring management, we're really getting ready to manage through the summer by assembling gear and putting stuff together. Getting ready to make new yards. This is that yard that I opened up here with the under the snow when we first did this. So we started making these hive stands. Until this, we were putting everything on concrete blocks, but you start adding 80 boxes at a time. That's a lot of concrete blocks. That's a lot of lifting. So I found down in Georgia where we get packaged bees, I saw them not this heavy because they don't put honey production colonies on them, but I saw this idea for these hive stands. I'm going to beef that out with a 2x6 and just keep 4 colonies on an 8-foot stand. So that's what we do. And that's kind of what we're doing now, setting up new yards. Getting ready. This is that yard, building it out with overwintered nukes, and you know, raising queens up there. And the farm is our refuge in our life now. We work constantly. Well, even when we're having fun, we're still working, but at least we're doing it up at the farm where it's just gorgeous. And we make nukes up there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to expanding some of that this year too. Springtime is bear time, right? I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about early spring fence testing. So that's definitely, bears are definitely coming out. We see the garbage cans through Woodstock on my way to work every day, just tipped over every Wednesday. Like, people have to continually relearn that we have bears here, or maybe there's some of the new city folks that have moved in. They'll learn quick. But the bears are active now, and they're going to be active, and they're hungry, right? They're coming out of quote unquote hibernation, or certainly denning up, and they make a mess of everything. So test your bear fence. You know, don't make assumptions. If they're battery powered and you left them on all winter, make sure that battery is still working at 100%. And don't let your guard down when it comes to bears, because it just sucks. They just wreck everything. We got fortunate. This bear hit was like nothing. They just tipped it over and probably got hit by the wire and took off. But we've had some in the past where they break everything and they drag it off into the woods, and yeah, it sucks. So be aware, don't get caught off guard. It is definitely bear season. And don't be afraid to tie bacon on that. This is a great time to train bears to your fence. They're coming out, they're smelling your bees. Get a $4 pound of bacon, you know, just the cheapest stuff you can get. Don't drape it. We tie it right on the 3rd wire, about nose height. Bears are smart. When they come in and hit that bacon, they get it in the mush. You can almost turn, not that I would turn my fence off, but I think you could almost turn your fence off at that point. We see bears walking down our driveway here, and they just look at the yard with kind of that, you know, I don't want any part of that again, you know, like they really don't even go near our bees when we see them anymore. but bear season is upon us for sure. And don't forget to order bees, you know, like, you know, if you've lost bees or you're looking to expand, certainly making nukes is the best way to expand, the cheapest way to expand. But I know when I did my first big expansion, I bought a bunch of packages. So they're running a little bit late this year. I think everybody's bees are running about 2 weeks late. It's been a little cold, a little rainy down south, but they're starting to get really, really scarce. And every year for the last 20, demand has outstripped supply. And there's always people that get caught off guard. You know, it gets beautiful out, it gets sunny, and everyone starts thinking, oh, I think I'd like to keep bees. And they call, and it's always, oh, I'm so sorry. You can order bees for next year. Or find a good beekeeper, join a good bee club, and have somebody make you up a nuke. You can start beekeeping right through June, you know, with somebody's nice enough to make you up a nuke out of their yard. So make some friends in the bee community. But if you're going to get packages or nukes or something like that, just know they are running really scarce right about now. So, and that is pretty much what spring management looks like. Like I said, it's not too involved. I wanted to kind of give you a better idea of kind of the management part. And then I also want to just share this. You've probably heard us talk about it before, but this is probably one of the most rewarding things that I've been part of in a long, long time. Bees for Development, helping beekeepers in Africa. It's such incredibly meaningful work. The American dollar goes so far in Africa. What you can do, the people you can help, lifting people out of poverty. It's just incredibly, incredibly, you know what it is? It's soul nourishing. That's how I feel. And this year we have done a campaign where our bees give back. So every single package in Nucleus Colony that we sell, and we're about sold out, we've donated $5. So $5 for every purchase has gone. We are halfway to our $20,000. We funded a number of projects now, and Megan spearheads this. This is like her baby, her brainchild. But the projects that we've done, she's been to the jungles in Africa. I mean, like, you know, here's lovely Megan. Look at her in this picture. This woman has sat in the back of a truck for like 12 hours on dirt roads in the jungles of Ethiopia to just see what these projects are all about and make sure that the money that's donated is going where it needs to be going and helping people. I can't say enough about it. So for everybody that bought bees from us this year, $5 donated is going to really change somebody's life in Africa. So can't say enough about that, but I will. One more thing. So just because we are trying to get a new program together, project for, it'll take about $20,000. I think we're about halfway there. We are raffling off an overwintered colony from up in our farm. On those pictures I showed you, these are locally mated queens. These are spectacular. These are the nukes. We're raffling off one of these nukes, but these are nukes that we won't sell to brand new beekeepers because we call them thoroughbreds. Like people call them, I want an overwintered nuke with, you know, those magic queens that you raise. And we tell people, you don't want a thoroughbred. You need a backyard pony. You want to start with a package, something a little smaller. These things are monstrous. They are super healthy. They've been overwintered, so they're growing fast. And for $5, you can throw your hat in the ring and maybe get one. They sell for $255. And you can get a raffle ticket. We have, I think they are on, Megan can correct me, but I think they're on our Etsy store at the Catskill Mountain Club or at Catskill Mountain or at Hudson Valley Bee Supply, excuse me. So raffle time, spend $5, do something good for somebody in Africa. And with that said, that is what we got. So let's see, 8:15, not too bad. Happy to take some questions. Haven't been monitoring the chat or anything, but I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff I've missed here as well. So yeah, if you got questions, lay them on me.
I don't see anything in the chat, but if anybody wants to just pipe up, go ahead.
This is Francis. I got a question for George.
Sure.
Do you do anything special in terms of cleaning your bottom board each spring?
You know, I don't make it a point to go right down and clean the bottom board, but if I've got both boxes off a bottom board at any time, we're running mostly solids now. We're trying to go to all solids. I'll run my hive tool on it and just scrape them off. But generally, I don't go through the process of taking everything off just for the sole purpose of cleaning my bottom board. No.
I mean, what I have done, I had 2 hives. One died this year, the other one was doing well. I usually take a bamboo stick and go in, take the mouse guard off and take a bamboo stick in just to make sure there's not a lot of dead bees blocking the way. What I find so interesting is the hive that's alive, the bees are coming in the hole on the top, coming in the bottom, and these in the bottom. I mean, it's not blocked. They just have gotten so accustomed to going in and out of that top. I have a shim with a hole in it, in and out of that shim hole. They don't come out the bottom.
Yeah, we see that too, Francis. I think generally it's just because the whole population is up in the upper half of the box and they've been used to using that hole. Like I said, like why cross all of that comb to go out the bottom and wade through dead bees? But I'll tell you, if you reverse your boxes, that's a great time to clean your bottom board, and your bees, even if you didn't, your bees will start using that bottom and clean it out. For me, that's always a pleasure. Like, and I know a lot of people do that. They'll take like the coat hanger, or we even sell like a specialized tool. You can go in there and scrape the dead bees out. But the truth is, I think if you just left them alone, once they kind of built up a little and found a warm day, you would just see them dragging those dead bees out and cleaning house. House cleaning is always one of those nice things that, you know, your bees are doing fine. Everything is great. Bees are cleaning house. But yeah, you wouldn't be the only one to scrape your bottom boards or to free up your entrances to try and encourage them back to using the bottom one. But the one thing that'll definitely do it is if you reverse your boxes.
The other question I have for you
Sure.
is that I've noticed my bees bringing in pollen,
Yes.
but the pollen, unlike that I see during the summertime, which is yellow and orange, is
Mhm.
white.
Oh, boy.
Now, is it from willows? Yeah, I mean, the past few days that we've had warm weather, they've had pollen packs on them, you know, on their legs, pulling them in the hive, but they're all a white color.
Oh, that's curious.
And I was curious whether anybody else had any idea of what they were getting the pollen from. The only thing that I believe that had pollen on it at the time were willows. Now we got some red maples that have opened up, some poplars that have opened up. There's a few more things in the past 3 or 4 days. This was a week, maybe a little more than a week ago, carrying on a lot of white pollen.
Oh, that's interesting. I know that the willows tend to be like that grayish, greenish color. The first willow pollen seems to be all in that range. We've seen a little bit more yellow stuff coming in, but white is curious. I don't know. Got a lot of snowdrops blooming. I know those are all kicking right now.
I have a suggestion.
Yeah, Jane.
Do they have a cracked corn that they, or bird seed that they could go to?
No, not
Cracked corn.
not on my property.
It also could be sawdust. We had on our farm someone calling in claiming a neighbor of theirs was all upset that their bees were bothering him, and he was out in his driveway with a chop saw cutting up 2x4s, and the bees were coming to get the sawdust.
Oh,
and they were taking it back. So it's possible it could have been that as well as the bird feeders or the, and stuff.
That's great, because those were my 2 suggestions, like probably in the bird seed and the corn. And I've I used to tap a lot of maple trees, and I'd be out with the chainsaw cutting. And the first time I saw it, I was, what are you stupid bees doing? And they're rolling. They were like drunk rolling in that sawdust, and the ash sawdust in particular. They just seemed to have an affinity for. And they were stuffing it in their baskets and bringing it home. I always thought, like, oh, who's the poor larva or the pupa that came out and like ate that? Ugh, sawdust. But yeah, they'll do crazy stuff like that for sure. Hard to say.
My bees are always in the chicken feed these days. So is that going to the pollen comb, or is that what they're doing?
Yeah, they'll take that dust and treat it just like pollen, and they'll pack it in and feed it to their bees. I mean, when there's nothing else, they'll do it.
Is it actually a form of protein for them then, or?
Well, I don't know about how much nutrition it has for sure,
Oh.
especially sawdust. Probably none, but
Chicken feed has a ton of protein.
Chicken feed, yeah, I imagine it would, right?
That's what I was saying, chicken feed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I would think so. There's got to be something good in it.
Hey, while we're on the pollen subject, York, do you open feed at all, like pollen in your apiaries at all, where you would put it into like a bucket and have it, as opposed to individually, putting it on hives? Have you done that, and do you see issues with that, or?
I haven't done it in a long time, Tony. And this is going back quite a few years now, but when we saw getting in the sawdust, I also had some powdered I used to mix up my own protein patties out of, the powdered sub. And so I just put it out in big cookie sheets, and they would get in that instead. Like, here, have something real that you can bring back.
Yeah.
And I have seen like the Randy Oliver type of feeders, and I've put them out in the past, like over the past few years. I still got a 5-gallon pail of some old dry sub, and never seem to really entice bees into getting to it. They just sort of ignore it, or I'll leave it out and the dew will get on it and it'll clump. And so I kind of stopped putting it out, but I have seen people use it. And I mean, if you can get your bees on it and get them, putting a protein patty is nice. You put it on your bees, but if you can get your bees packing it in and doing what bees do and putting it right where they know they need it, I think that's a cool thing. Get a pound of it and give it a try, but you got to keep it dry. That's the thing.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. If it's not enclosed, if the dew gets on it, it's over. It'll be solid the next day. So it's got to be sort of in one of those dedicated, sort of feeders. Yeah.
Hello.
I
I have a question. I'm sorry. By the way, amazing presentation. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Ken.
Yeah, no, really great. I had to move my three. I have 3 hives, and they all made it through the winter so far. And I know it's a difficult time right now, but I had to move them for some construction reasons, and it was only 300 feet. And we did it when it was freezing. And I tried to do, like, I put twigs in front of the hives and whatever. And so far, so good. They're still there. Do I have to worry about that now? It's been about 4 weeks.
And they've been flying?
They've been fine. Yeah, they've all left the hive and they've all gone back.
Good, because
okay.
I've always
I still
wondered
have to
that.
worry? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I always think, like, are they going to come out and reorient for the season, or are they going to remember where they were? And I've never had an opportunity to try it. So that's interesting to me that you've done that and your bees.
Well, what's really interesting for me was, like, we did it like the last freezing day in March, right? And we moved them on a tractor, and then I put all these bushes and I put twigs in front of the entrances or whatever, because they all say to distract them on their way out. And then it was warm like 3 or 4 days afterwards. So I thought, oh, I've lost them, but they never went. Like I kept going back to where they were, and they didn't go back there, and they're still in the hive now. So, do you think I'm over? Do you think it's okay now?
Yeah, I mean, if you've seen them leave,
away.
We've had some pretty warm days. So if they're coming and going like they should be and haven't all gone back to the original location, I'd say you're.
No, they haven't.
Yeah, I think you're out of the woods.
Oh, thank God. Okay.
How cold was it when you moved them?
It was like 28 degrees.
Yeah,
I did tape them all up, And for 24 hours, I kept them in the tape, so like they couldn't get out of the hive.
Mhm.
And then I released that all. I mean, hey, it's the internet. You know, I don't know what the hell I was doing. You know?
I mean, you got to do what you got to do for sure. That's something I learned. You know, we keep relearning that in beekeeping. You got to do what you got to do when you got to do it.
But you think if they're flying back in, I'm good. Okay, that's what
I think
that's
you're
what-
probably pretty good. My biggest concern moving bees when it's that cold is knocking them off the cluster and they're just moving too slow and they can't get back into cluster, and then they'll die in clumps on the bottom board if you bounce them out of cluster. But
Oh,
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I think I did lose a lot of bees, to tell you the truth, but
You may have lost
they're
some,
still
but
there though.
yeah, great. I'm glad they're still flying. Good.
Thank
We
you.
have another question in the chat real quick from
Sure.
Sophie. She asks, have you ever tried to use foundationless frames to have the bees build whatever size cells they need at the time?
Absolutely. Yep. I spent probably my first 8-10 years trying to be treatment free, and I've tried all the alternative things because I just love to experiment. And once you've got a bunch of bees and you feel more emboldened to experiment, and that was one of the ones I tried, was going foundationless, just to let them build their own comb and, like I said, do it natural. And I have never had bees do it right. And I know people that have had bees do it right, but my bees never did. So they always like put a wave in the comb, which is part of what bees do naturally. If you notice those shim picks, everything's in a wave because that adds strength. It's not just the cell, it's the wave in the cell that adds to the strength. So they always seem to put that wave in the comb, which I hated. And then if lots of brace comb, right? Because it's a complete violation. Even if you've got strips of foundation in there, you have completely violated the bee space. So I would say at least half the time they made some weird brace comb in between. And when they're making their own comb, that's even harder to correct because you've got no foundation to go, no midrib to get back down to. So that was kind of tricky. Generally, I would advise against it unless you just got lots of bees and feel like playing around with it. And the truth is no matter what foundation you give your bees, they're going to make whatever size cell they want on that.
Okay. Kathy's asking, she has a question about Sertan. You want to go ahead, Kathy?
Sure, Kath.
Hi, thank you. When you were talking about the Sertan, you said, mix it up and spray it on the comb.
Yep.
Is that this time of year? Because I did a quick read about it and it said something about doing it like after they've done the honey production and before the new honey production. So I didn't know if you had to do it in the fall or if you can do it this year, because I have some old comb and.
Yeah, I think, and again, this is where sometimes I get, I'm giving advice and I'm telling you how I do things, but I'm managing differently because of the number of colonies we have. If I just had a few colonies in the backyard, I would just bring them all in the house and spray them in the fall and be done with it. But to do hundreds at a time when they come off, they come out of the system, the amount of robbing and just the insanity that would ensue. Also, we share a property with a crane company and there's a retail business on the same property. So to have bees, they can be kind of a nuisance. So we sort of just wait until this time of year because the bees aren't flying and we've got a lot to do. But I think you can do it any time of year. You just want to make sure they dry. So spray them, allow them to dry. For us, we'll just stand them all up on end and just probably run a couple of fans through them. But that should take a day and then we'll store them all. But yeah, I'm probably more excited about Sertan than I've been excited about a lot of things in a long time. Just because using that other stuff was such a drag and monitoring it to make sure, because it's a consumable. It's in every week you got to go out and make sure and replace it. And there are these drawers because our supers are stacked 14 high and you can only go 7 high in the stack. And then you have to so it's on top. I'm on a ladder. It's just a pain in the butt. So yeah, can't say enough how excited I am about Sertan.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Everybody having a good season coming out of winter?
Well, we got one more quick question. Can you
Sure,
speak
Linda.
on how to best manage a new nuke with overwintering being the primary goal?
how to manage a new nucleus colony this year to overwinter, so
Yeah.
to make it through next year.
Yeah, Greg, I don't know if you're here. You want to go ahead and open your mic, talk, let York know. Here he is.
That's pretty much the whole question. Like,
Okay.
Did you lose your bees or something, and you just want to like make sure they make it this time? Is that where we're going?
yeah, I had a single colony that didn't survive the winter, and that's sad.
Yeah, especially when it's your only one. I get it. For me, I would, well, a couple of things. I'd be wondering where you got it. Did you get it from a treatment-free beekeeper? So it's probably going to start off with maybe a little bit higher mite load, versus if you got them from like out of state where they all have to be sort of treated. So you'd probably be starting with a lower mite load, or maybe just start monitoring right off the bat. That's probably really the best thing, is just know what your mite counts are and do it every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, and just watch that number. So much else of what happens. I mean, aside from like if your bees swarm late or there are other things that are out of your control to some degree, the one thing that's in your control is to keep your mite numbers low. And especially if you're new, it's kind of complex, or it can be. What to treat with when you have honey supers on, because you can treat with anything as long as you're never going to produce honey for human consumption. You can use amitraz strips in there. But you have to sort of juggle that with, you have honey supers on, now you're limited to formic. But I still think the bottom line is to know that you are below 2% and preferably below 1%. And it's all about the mites. Your bees can take care of so many other things that normally would affect them. Routine viruses in the hive don't affect your bees. It's only when they're weakened by mites and the viruses that they vector, right? So it's called the Varroa virus complex for a reason. It's not ever the mites that are killing your bees. It's the mites giving your bees viruses. Now you've got sick bees, if you're fighting off, if you've got the flu, it makes it hard to then fight off a staph infection or something else, right? It's in that vein. It's your bees are just having a hard time. They're immunocompromised, basically. So smaller things that normally might not affect your bees are going to be affecting them in a outsized way. So for me, it's all about the mites. Controlling them early, making sure your numbers are routinely low. If you can stomach it, use the alcohol washer, just so you're not, having to fudge numbers and guess, because it's almost 100%. If not, definitely use a sugar roll. But that's really what it's about. If you want to get a new nuke this year and get it through next winter, pay attention to its mites and pay attention to its nutrition. I think to some degree, that's one of those things that takes a few years of having bees to understand the importance of protein in a hive in the month of August. So if you're looking in your hive in August and you're not really seeing a lot of pollen coming in and you're not seeing a lot of pollen stored, that is the time of year when the bees are being created that are going to make and become your winter, your Dinatitis, the most important generation of bees you have. All of that happens in the month of August, and they need a lot of protein in their diet to make it, to make a good, healthy, again, they incorporate that protein and then they give it up as royal jelly. So the more vitellogenin they have stored, that's what they convert the protein to as a body fat. You might think of it that way. Then they convert it into royal jelly, and then you've got good, healthy. If you got your mites under control, they're not immunocompromised going in the winter, with good nutrition. So it's all about mites and nutrition. Make sure they got plenty of space so they don't swarm on you, because that's always a wild card in the fall. And I think if you've just got those things under control, your chances of them making it through the winter are astronomically better than people who are slack or don't understand those things.
Thank you. I think I did have the mites under control, but yeah, protein probably wasn't there.
Yeah.
Couple more in the chat, York.
All right.
one of my hives moved from one hive to another in November. Basically, it was abandoned, and she wants to know what treatment does she have to do to the resources in the abandoned hive.
So they totally absconded, left the hive.
They went to next door neighbor hive and abandoned their original hive. One of my hives moved out from one hive to another in November. She hasn't put the hive away yet. What treatment do I need to do with the abandoned hive if I can use it again?
I'm stuck on the moving from one to the other. That's a very interesting situation. To answer the question, first determine that there was no real disease. Foul brood is just the one we're always concerned with. It's fairly rare, but I still think we should all learn to identify and understand that one, just because it's so virulent and is so easily spread and can affect all of your neighbors. If you absolutely make sure and identify that that wasn't the problem, excuse me, and there's definite ways to do that. There's pretty obvious signs of that. I would highly doubt it was that. Then you don't have to do anything. That's the only one we worry about when it comes to moving equipment or dealing, because nothing lives off host. Not even the fallow brood, except American fallow brood makes a spore that'll stay there in that hive. And then it'll revegetate when you put new bees in there. So that's why we're so concerned about that one. But that's such a rarity. I would doubt that. So a couple of things. If that hive was, I'm still curious about it moving. Like, and if they're on here, if they wanted to jump in and kind of explain a little bit. Did they see it move into the other? Did they watch it? Did they assume because there were no more bees there that they moved?
Rika, you want to open your mic? Here she is.
Yeah, actually, in November, from an original hive was really powerful, and the next door was very weak.
Yep.
And I assume because from a next door hive, at the end of the summer, they swarmed out. And not so many bee action was happening in the middle hive. And the original hive was so powerful. And from original hive, the November, bee just moved out and moved to a weak hive. And after that, original hive was abandoned totally.
That's very curious.
Before they moved out, I kind of like looking at every day, like other two hives, not so many bees dead in front of it, but in front of our original hive, which was abandoned, like every day, 50 bees were dead in front of it for a while. So I thought maybe there was something was not right in the abandoned hive. And, the bees moved out to next door. They did really well in the winter, and they're very active at this moment. And, some bees started checking out original hive. And I thought, maybe, some bees are moving back again. But seems to me just stealing honey. They don't want to live there again.
They're still, if they're robbing it, they're definitely going home. Then they may hang out. You may have some even, die there, but they're probably.
But the November from original hive, all bee moved out and still abandoned.
But you didn't see them move into another, like you didn't physically watch them.
I watched them.
You watched them move out of one and into the other.
Yes, it was so much bees moving there, and I was just staring for hours.
Wow. I've seen that in the summertime, like, oh my God, look at one literally moving into the other, but November kind of threw me interesting. Generally, when we see that bees have totally, when you open a hive, certainly before December or, by January 1st, and you see little to no bees in there, a lot of folks tend to think, oh, CCD, because they had read that, the bees all leave. But what generally is happening is it's what we call altruistic self-removal. So social insects, when they know they have a virus or they know they're sick, will fly off if it's warm enough, and they'll die in the field. You won't see them all dead in the hive. They'll die outside the hive, so they're not contaminating or potentially contaminating their sisters. So usually when we see when we see bees that are totally gone, especially that early, it's a sign of parasitic mite syndrome, because they've got a heavy virus load and they just altruistically self-remove from the hive. And when you go and look at them, you go, oh, all the bees are gone. And they are, but they were all sick from mites. And then we start looking and doing a pathology of taking the hive apart, looking for things like remaining capped brood, partially emerged brood. That's usually a big sign. In fact, I did a postmortem with someone in the parking lot today who explained this to me. We went through it, and sure enough, there it was, like partially emerged brood, textbook, parasitic mite syndrome, had the mite feces on the walls, had little runty bees. I didn't see as many mites on his bottom board as I thought I might, but all the other signs of parasitic mite syndrome were there. So I would, when you do get around to taking that empty hive apart, look for those signs that maybe they had a high mite load. Might be eye-opening.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and one more question. It looks like I have a bit of comb. I'm thinking of populating a resource hive with a package and an extra queen. Good idea.
You're going to split one single package into two and just add another queen to it?
You want to?
Yes.
Excellent idea. How long have you had bees?
5 years.
You're ready. We've done this quite a bit in the past. So I've got some experience with it. It's a little tricky, so pay attention to the weather forecast. But yes, you can definitely. So a couple of challenges for you are going to be keeping the bees, like basically shaking them in half and half. Don't be afraid to spray them. Spritz them with sugar syrup to keep them out of the air, because you're going to be down to 1.5 pounds of bees in each side, which if you've got comb, and preferably if you got some honey in there with them, it should work fine. I mean, we always found that it worked okay. And it's kind of a cool thing that you can just take one package and split it. So yeah, if you're ready to do some experimenting, I say go for it. The other thing we did is we screened them in. I didn't let them out for a couple of days. We left them right in the garage. It was a little bit cold too. So I think we did 30. We did 30 of those, Megan? I think we did 30 at a time.
Yeah, but it was really cold, and that's why we kept them.
That's why we left them in the barn.
We had a frame of honey for them, so we knew that they were safe with food, and we kept them in the dark and cool. But it was actually snowing when we did it.
Yep.
So we didn't dare, although we like to be daring beekeepers, we didn't dare put 1.5 pounds of bees out in the snow. So we waited a few days.
Yeah, so they stayed there a few days. We moved them out and let them go, and everyone worked out great. So I think that's a fun way to go experimenting with bees, especially if you got some experience. And you got comb and honey. I don't think I would have done it if I had to feed them or anything like that, but that always makes it easier, a frame of honey.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
Hey, York, do you ever treat for mites on packages by spraying?
I don't, but I have been intrigued by a couple of, like oxalic acid or something like that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Meg.
Yeah, so there's a directive on that, Tony, that Brushy got, and it includes feeding the bees, so spraying the screen, then the oxalic spray, and then leaving them for 3 more days in the package. And we have never thought leaving the bees for 3 more days in the package made one bit of sense.
Yeah.
So we know people that have gone down before and sprayed and then brought back bees, but that's still not the directive that is supposed to be useful. And I just think leaving packaged bees for 3 days. We've done sugar shakes on bees and alcohol washes on packaged bees to see what our mite counts are for the bees that we're selling. And they're always fairly low. So
are they?
Yeah, it seemed like a really good idea to kind of know what it's 300 bees, and if you only got 15,000 or 12,000, it still might be worth checking with an alcohol wash or a sugar shake.
Because the spraying with oxalic, I had read somewhere, but I went back to actually verify. They talked about actually spraying first with just sugar syrup and have the bees eat the sugar syrup, so that when you spray with the oxalic mixture, they're not eating that. it's
That's-
staying on them longer,
Yeah.
which in effect is what's killing the mites
Yeah.
that may be on them. And so I was just wondering if, you had done that. But the 3-day thing is new to me, that keeping them in for 3 days more in the package.
Yeah.
That,
I think if you just did a shake and you knew what you were up against, you could even use something like a hop guard or apple guard or something, just kind of knock it down before you got brood going, and you could use a stronger treatment.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Oh, and just so everybody who's not familiar, we're talking about feeding them is a really important step if you're going to do that, because the oxalic acid is mixed in a sugar syrup, not as a food, but as a sticker. So it sticks to the bees. So you don't want the bees eating the oxalic acid. So you fill them up on sugar first, just so everybody understands why that is.
That's all the questions in the chat. Tony
Oh,
did
yeah.
mention Cornell's developed a great YouTube video on foul brood.
Oh, great. You can't know too much about it. I wouldn't get overly fearful of it, but always be vigilant of it. I got it once up in Schoharie. I know exactly why, and I know exactly how. And it wasn't hard to diagnose. But
Well, when you listen to Joan Mahoney, I mean, they had an increase, I think, last year from the year before of foul, how many foul brood cases they dealt with in, the apiary inspector. So it's always good to know what it looks like, because they actually sometimes rely on beekeepers to identify it, and then they can go and confirm it. So it's the video that I think Emma did in conjunction with, Joan's findings is worth watching. It's like 20 minutes.
Yeah, that sounds good. I know Paul Cappy, the previous state apiarist, had spoken at the Catskill Mountain Club years ago and was talking about fallow brood. And I was like, fallow brood? He's like, it's around. There are definitely, we track where it is. He's like, where do you keep your bees? I said, Schoharie County. He was like, you are in a hotbed of it. I said, oh, would you like to tell me exactly where? I'll fix that problem. He was like, no, I can't give out any information. But sure enough, up in Schoharie, and it's because there's a lot of just old school beekeepers who aren't treating their bees right. And what happened to me is I didn't want to keep bees in this yard because this old guy, you could look at his equipment and know probably something bad was going to happen. But he was like 90. I thought he was dead, actually. He said, oh, Charlie's not keeping bees. So I set up this yard. 2 weeks later, Charlie's got bees again, and a bear tore him up. And my bees robbed his bees. And 2 weeks later, it smelled like a family of dead rabbits lived under my hives. Yeah. It was all the classic symptoms.
Well, the old guys, prophylactically treated with terramycin on their hives to suppress it. So then if you by chance ever bought a hive from them and you got it and then you didn't do the same, all of a sudden, boom, there it is.
Yeah. And now you can't do the same.
Right.
Yeah.
So now you can't do it, but that's what used to happen, years and years ago.
Yeah, when people
good old
ask,
days before the mites.
Yeah, the good old days. People still to this day, oh, look, I got this great deal on a barn find, like, oh no. Yeah. And sure enough, I think one person way back when we had first opened, they were growing, they were growing and they got a great deal, and it just wiped out. It went through everything. They had no idea about it. And it was like, when they sent us pictures, I was like, gee, you got to burn all of that and start over. It was kind of heartbreaking. They thought they were getting a deal and it ended up setting them back quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, that's it in the chat.
All right. Excellent. If nobody else has any questions, I hope you all have a great season. I think we're off to a good start. Weather forecast looks good. Make sure your bees aren't going to starve to death. That is the worst thing, to get them through, to treat your mites and then get caught off guard by, starvation is 100% beekeeper error, 100% preventable. Don't be afraid to look at your bees, especially now. I think we're definitely out of the woods. Treat them right, treat your mites early, treat them often, monitor, know what your mite numbers are. Best thing you can do as a beekeeper now. Know what your number is.
So if you want to unmute and thank Yorick, yay!
Thank you.
Thanks, York.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
York.
My
Great
pleasure.
presentation.
Thank you,
Thank
thank you,
you.
thank you.
Great
Take care,
presentation.
guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, York.